Currently, Hispanics make up 17% of the U.S. population. However, by mid-century, their share is expected to increase to 29%, while non-Hispanic whites, now in the majority, can anticipate falling to a large minority. The significance of these shifting demographics has recently been noted in the 2012 presidential election. While immigration reform is at the forefront of the majority of recent conversations and debates, the swiftly rising Hispanic population in America has multiple implications beyond the vote. Immigrant populations are historically underserved in the realm of education. In 1990, 32% of Latinos failed to graduate from high school or achieve a GED certificate. The proportion dropped to 15% by 2010. However, demographic changes may play more of a role in this number than greater access to educational resources. In Grand Rapids Public Schools, Hispanic enrollment continues to rise, with the dropout rate hovering around 33%. Hispanics continue to rank much higher than whites, blacks, and Asians in failing to achieve a high school education, and their needs in the educational community must be addressed, especially in the face of demographic change. The projected population increase, coupled with high dropout rates, indicates a potentially staggering gap in education, and by extension, opportunity in the expanding Hispanic community, creating potential socioeconomic disparities on a large scale.
Okay, so today we have brought 4 members from different sectors of our West Michigan educational community to shed some light on the issues facing the Hispanic population with regards to educational attainment. Okay, on the very end here, we have John Matias. He is representing our public school sector. John is the community coordinator with Arbor Circle at Burton Elementary and Middle School, which is part of the Grand Rapids Public School District. And next to him, we have Rosa Fraga. And Rosa is representing our private school sector. She is the principal of San Juan Diego Academy, and that is a private Catholic elementary school in Grand Rapids. And next to her, we have Martha Gonzalez-Cortes. And Martha is representing the Hispanic population as a whole here in West Michigan, and she is the CEO of the Hispanic Center of West Michigan. And on this end, we have Tony Baker. He's representing the higher education as well as public education. Tony Baker is a professor of sociology at Ferris State University, a board member on the Grand Rapids Public School Board, and the co-founder and interim director of the Center for Latina Studies at Ferris State. Okay. I'm going to start out with some questions that are individualized, and I'm going to start out with you, Martha. And I'm hoping that you could briefly describe the role of the Hispanic Center and its role in education in the community, and also give us a better idea of the cultural diversity that exists within the Hispanic population here.
Thank you very much, Allison. Good afternoon, everyone. We want to start this. It's always a mistake to give me a microphone and say, please be brief. So the Hispanic Center of Western Michigan has a staff of 30 full-time year-round staff that are serving an average of 17,500 individual Latinos and families per year through a variety of programming. We are an organization that exists to serve, to educate, and to advocate. And the education portion of our mission has had us focusing specifically on areas of most critical need and unmet need for our population. And so I always start off every presentation by explaining that the Hispanic Center exists to serve vulnerable populations and not everyone in our Latino corridor. There are people in my community that don't need direct support and assistance from this organization. They engage us as board members and as volunteers and as donors, but are not part of our client base. Our client base is a very vulnerable newcomer community, immigrant community, farm worker community, urban poor, working poor. And we exist to address issues of critical need, unmet need in the population. And so historically in the Latino community, our community has said to us, please focus on the academic achievement concerns of our kids in middle and high school, in the middle and high school arena. And most recently, we have launched into programming in the early childhood space as well, because of the exodus of service from the urban core, impacting both the Latino and African American community in the last handful of years. We're serving about 300 students a year. We are an organization that is currently running some of both middle and high school programming in the Believe to Become partner family. And that work has us focusing specifically on closing the academic achievement gap and working specifically towards successful completion of both middle and high school academic work and transition to either higher education or meaningful career paths for our young people. We serve about 50 to 100 Latino youth, again, teenagers ages 14 to 21, that are interested in workforce development as well. And we have a very robust area of adult education programming that includes ESL, digital connectors, and a newly launched Spanish GED program that is the only one of its kind in the state of Michigan that we know of at this stage. And we're serving about 150 to 200 clients in that adult education arena coming through the door. And as I indicated earlier, we've launched our first early childhood classroom with 32 children in a loaned space at San Juan Diego Academy. And we're funded by partners at the Early Learning Neighborhood Collaborative, ELNC, and that's underwritten by the Kellogg Foundation. But we are proud partners with San Juan Diego Academy in this initial effort to launch early childhood programming in the city for our population.
Thank you. And could you give us an idea of the diversity that exists within our Latino population?
Thank you, Allison. Yes. So of the 55,000 Latinos that live in the city of Grand Rapids and the county, about 68% are individuals of Mexican descent. But we also have a significant Caribbean corridor made up of Puerto Rican, Dominican, and a Cuban population that is significant. We have the largest Cuban refugee community in the state of Michigan. And we also have meaningful representation and a growing sector of representation from our Guatemalan community. It's notable that Grand Rapids has the largest Guatemalan community in the state of Michigan as well. One of the biggest issues impacting the diversity, besides the fact that you want to know a little bit about national histories before you sit somebody down for a Saturday brunch, so that you make sure that people don't kill each other over issues of history and religion and borders. It's also important to know that in the Guatemalan community in particular, our Southern Mexican and Northern Central American community that's here is a population that's potentially trilingual. And so we have a lot of challenges serving a population that speaks neither Spanish nor English as a primary language, but speaks an indigenous dialect as a primary language in the home, and is a community that is difficult to serve within our ranks.
Thank you, Martha. And next, Rosa Fraga. I was hoping you could enlighten us on the success in retaining Hispanic students in the private school sector versus the public school sector.
Well, first of all, I have been working in the public school sector for almost all my life. I worked with Grand Rapids Public Schools. I started out in 1972 teaching middle school girls from Burton Junior High at that time how to type. And I've continued. Most of my career has been with Grand Rapids Public Schools in the adult community education sector, so I've learned how to collaborate with and how to garner support from local neighborhood organizations, because that's really the only way that you can run a successful adult or community organization is through collaboration. And that was very, very helpful for me. I also, after doing that, we found that we saw so many young people in our adult education centers from the ages of 14, 15, 16, and 17 who had not finished school and who were sitting next to adults, and they could not be served in the way they needed to be served, considering the age difference. So we began in 1996 a school called Adelante High School, which was an alternative high school. And it primarily served many of those newcomers who were not successful in the Grand Rapids public schools and their high schools. And I am now the principal of San Juan Diego Academy, which is a Catholic school, private, tuition-based, faith-based school that straddles the Granville Avenue neighborhood, Granville Avenue corridor in Wyoming. We're right next to Wyoming. So it's the corridor, that Latino neighborhood has really extended itself into Wyoming. And so we serve that neighborhood. But as a private school, we serve the entire Grand Rapids region because we are open to serve anyone who has the desire to have their child in a Catholic school. San Juan Diego Academy has morphed from a traditional parish-based school, Catholic school, to a interparochial regional school. And the reason for that is because of the same challenges that we found at what was formerly Holy Name of Jesus School. We are the same challenges that public schools find when they try to address the education of Latino children who come from recent immigrant families. The biggest challenge, of course, with the private school is tuition. We are situated in an area that's right next to Cesar Chavez School and Godfrey Lee schools, and those are schools that have high numbers of Latino children and also high numbers of children who live in poverty. And so we represent that same type, those same families, and we also represent those same, that same diversity that Martha was talking about. Our Latino children we represent that same kind of diversity. We found ourselves as Holy Name of Jesus School in a situation where we knew that we were going to go the way of many urban Catholic parish schools were going. And that is a population, a parish that could no longer afford schools. And we saw the handwriting on the wall. And at that time, we began to look at some help. And we discovered a study done by the University of Notre Dame called Nurturing the Soul of a Nation. And it was a study that came out at the very end of 2009. It was a national study done about Catholic schools that had high populations of Latino children that were successful, where the schools were thriving, not only children achieving, but actually some of them were even building versus closing schools. And so they looked at a number of factors. What makes that type of a private school, tuition-based, that works with children who live in poverty, Latino children from recent immigrant families, what are some of the things that make those schools successful? And we found that we were already engaging in some of those. And one of that is that very important aspect of community. So whether you're faith-based or public-based, you need to engage the community. And the community for our school also is primarily families, the parish families and the parishes that are in our interparochial regions. It also means reaching out to those organizations that meet the needs of our immigrant families, such as the Hispanic Center would be one of them, Grand Rapids Public Schools. All of the public schools that are in our area have reached out. We've reached out to them. We also found that one of the factors of a successful Catholic or private school that would work with Latinos is that you need to meet the needs of the families, not necessarily just the children. It's no longer about children. It's about meeting the needs of the family. And so a successful school would have what parents need. We have English as a second language classes. We have a computer lab that provides ESL, supplements them with Rosetta Stone instruction. We have collaborations with organizations that provide information about immigration, about services that are in the area and how to access those services. Those are the kinds of things that make a successful school, not just for, that I think, not just for private faith-based schools, but definitely for even public schools as well. And we found that that is a wonderful way to retain families and retain students. The study done by the University of Notre Dame also showed that students, Latino students who graduated from Catholic schools, in comparison to other Latino children from other schools, were 42% more likely to finish high school. And when you consider the high rates of the high dropout rates for Latinos all over the country, and in different cities and in different areas, it's much higher than 33%. That's really very significant because also it shows that those same Latino students who graduate from Catholic schools are 2.5 times more likely to not only enter university levels, but to graduate with a profession. What we discovered is that there's our national studies done on Catholic schools that shows there is an advantage for any student who graduates from a Catholic school, and that is that those children are more likely to enter universities and be successful in universities. They are more likely to be part of the professional community, and they are more likely nationwide to be people who give back, who donate, and to provide service within their community. And so we are seeing that with our recent graduates from high school who enter Catholic Central High School, finish the whole system, going on to the university level. They are very successful there. They're at the top of their class. So those are the kinds of things that Catholic schools can offer Latino children. This higher standard of excellence. And the truth is, as San Juan Diego Academy, we have the same challenges as the public schools do. Our children come to kindergarten without speaking English. Children transfer into our schools at mid-grade or even at middle school with 2 or 3 years behind grade level. And we operate our school through donorship. Every single one of our parents receives scholarships to attend. And so it's a very difficult process to handle, but we have shown success because we've taken on some of those research-based strategies and programs that have been proven to be successful with students who are at risk for dropping out or to increase or accelerate learning. And one of them is a looping. Looping has been shown. Looping, some of you who are in education know that looping means that you stay with your teacher for 2 years and that the whole grade stays together. And that's really important because it means there's less time lost from when you transition from year to year. You have one adult who's invested in you for over 2-year periods. That particular teacher is trained and is knowledgeable about what you need when you start and when you leave 2 years later, and can plan for that. So looping everywhere has been shown to help children who are at risk, and we've used that. The other thing that we've done that I know has been very successful in other school districts or schools where there's been low achievement is the extended day. We frankly cannot afford to have an extended year. We do everything we can to get the money that we need to operate year to year because so many people come to San Juan Diego Academy on scholarship. Everybody pays tuition, but it's still expensive for many of our families. So what we've done is that we've just extended our day by an hour. We have a 40-hour week. Our teachers have a 40-hour teaching week, plus they're there a half an hour before school starts and a half an hour after. So we are in school from, teachers are in school from 7:30 until 4:30. Students, kindergarten through 8, are in school from 8 o'clock in the morning until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We have 180 days of instruction, that's hands-on instruction. So we understand what our public school counterparts understand, but because we are a private school, we have a little bit of flexibility with our calendar. And so we, by having that extended hour, that extended day, we can add the equivalent of 30 to 40 days of instruction. Another very important component is parent involvement that you're going to be talking about, and it is key. When a parent has to put down money that they don't have every month for their child to be in school, they're there. They're there at any time. They're there in the morning when they drop them off to talk. They're there in the afternoon when they pick them up to talk. So that is really something that we discover is very, very important, that our parents are more than willing to do.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to John Matias now, and if you could give us a brief overview of the intersection of education and community resources that takes place at Burton Elementary and Middle School.
Great, thanks, Allison.
Mm-hmm.
So my name is Jaun Matias, and I'm a community school coordinator. By trade, I'm a counselor, a therapist. I work with Arbor Circle, and I am actually stationed at Burton Elementary, K through 8th grade. I'm part of the KSSN network, Kent School Services Network, that began in '08 with 8 schools that the Kent Services Network is part of in Grand Rapids Public School, but then also in Comstock Park, in Cedar Springs, and in the Wyoming. So it's continuing to grow. So the concept behind a community school is that it takes a village to educate a child. And the idea is that we want to be able to partner with, because we know that in the public schools, the teachers have their hands full. By the way, let me show of hands, who are public school students here? Just raise your hand. Private? Okay. And so teachers have their hands full in educating their children. And unlike private schools, where they're seeing where that dollar goes, our parents don't see that. And so I wish that we could give them a check stub that says this is what you're giving the school, and maybe that would change some of the perception in terms of okay, educate my kid. But as a community school, what we do is we partner with the administration of the school, with partners within the community to bring in services that are needed. So for example, at Burton, we have a health center through Cherry Health Clinic. We have partners like DHS. We have a worker that's in our school that services our 1,000 families, 1,000 kids that we have between the elementary and middle school. My work is to hopefully blend the two together and figure out what the needs are in my community there, and then making those needs happen. And let me tell you, it is astronomical in terms of what our kids need. They need emotional help. Parents need parenting classes sometimes. They need interventions because of some of the issues that are overwhelming in their own home. The community does not stay outside the school, it comes within the school. So gang issues, drugs, injustices, the schools face that. every day. We have children who are missing their parents because they've been deported. We have, alcoholism and drug addiction that our kids face and that our teachers see every day. I work with actually three therapists, and so that what we try to do is in a culturally sensitive and respectful way, we try to engage those families and parents to be able to meet those very real needs that sometimes they are public in terms of people knowing what's going on, and sometimes it's very private in which some intervention is needed. Often we have teachers that will come to us and say, I've noticed this about this child, and then we try to figure out how to meet that need. If you come to my office today, you will see that it's a very messy office because I have books that I'm collecting for Bingo for Books. I have clothing that's been donated that I give to families. I have calls waiting to be made that families that say, hey, I have a bunk bed to give to someone. Do you know of that need? And then we meet that need. I wish that my job description was, a 3-point description, but it's not. I do anything from, for example, we have a child that's special need that I had to help take to the bathroom. Okay, I have a master's degree. But that's the kind of work that's needed. And at the same time, I have a mom that comes to my office and says, I'm ready to divorce my husband because this is happening. What do I do? I don't know what to do with my child because he continues to run away. To a teacher coming to me saying, I've tried to call this parent and I don't know what to do. Can you do a home visit with me? That's all part of what I do as a community school coordinator. And so what our vision is, my vision is to try and make a principal's job easier so that she can focus on the administration, on helping teachers teach, and then for us to hopefully fill in that gap with partners, not do it ourselves, but with partners. We have some wonderful parents that do a lot of volunteering in our school. They want to help, and sometimes because of the lack of their own education, whether it's because of language, they don't know how to speak English, to literally, I only went to 3rd grade in my native country. Those kinds of issues that they face. So they want to help, and typically with language barriers, at about the 3rd grade is when parents really can't help their child with homework. So you can imagine, obviously they're not going to stop their education at 3rd grade. And so they depend a lot on after-school programs like Loop, or in the Kroc Center that helps, or things that the Hispanic Center are doing, out-of-school experiences that those children need. And of course, those parents are working. So another issue is the fact that they depend on those programs like Loop to keep their kid till 5:30 so that when I get out of work, I can pick them up. Not that it's a babysitting service, but it definitely helps in helping that family, but also in terms of helping educate. So with Kent School Services Network, we're in 8 of the public GRPS schools. And one of the things that we do is we try to remove the attendance issue. Because we know if kids aren't in school, they're not going to learn. And many of our kids miss too much school, which affects obviously their learning, which affects their grades and the grades that they go into, and the fact that they are behind in their grade. We also try to improve the services that our families can experience. So we might have a connection, for example, to the YMCA, who has a Zumba class at CCOM for free that our families can take advantage of, because our families like to play just like the middle class families do. They enjoy vacations as well, but they sometimes can't afford those kinds of things. And then we try to deliver services that are needed. And sometimes that takes a whole lot of creativity and then convincing the broader community that this is a good way to invest in this particular community. And we can help you meet your mission or your desire to give back to that community. So one of the things that I try to do is so for example, if you all wanted to come to my school, which I invite you to, I would try my best to remove those barriers so that if you wanted to tutor if you wanted to come in and do something for us, that you would be able to call someone, get what you need, come to the school, and then do your thing. So that you feel good about giving back to the community, and then we get, and our kids certainly get that benefit of folks that are interested in giving back or have a passion for making a difference in a child's life. One of the things too that we focus on in the Kent School Services Network is parent engagement. We have ESL in our classes. We have a Pilot-In program, which is a parenting program. Plaza Comunitaria is not relatively new, but certainly resurrected K through high school in Spanish online curriculum for people who are Spanish speaking, where they can get their education, and it's growing. GRPS, obviously, they have over 19,000 students. Roughly about 32% of that, 6,000 or so, are Hispanic students with language issues. And so we find that we have to do a whole lot of other things as part of our job descriptions as community school coordinators. So.
Okay, thank you, John. And Dr. Tony Baker, if you could enlighten us on the reasonings that led to the creation of the Latino Center at Ferris State and what it hopes to accomplish there in the higher learning atmosphere.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to try to just wear my Ferris hat today, but I have this GRPS hat, which I'm a strong advocate for. I think it's, and I'm also a sociologist, and I'm also not indigenous to the Latino community here, but I spent a lot of time trying to make connections, and I think I hope that everybody recognizes really if you're not familiar with the Latino community or the education community in Grand Rapids, both are very strong, and I think it's very important that you recognize the significance of and the sophistication of the community work that's happening, and in education as well. So John was talking about the community schools model. As someone who is on a public school board in 2013, which is experiencing, anyone in public education in 2013 is experiencing tremendous difficulties. But yet you'll probably see most, and there's a front page story even today in the Grand Rapids Press, that's a fairly hopeful story about what's happening in Grand Rapids Public Schools. And I would say that this community has so many institutions that are a part of educating the children and see it as their responsibility to educate children, and haven't just given it over to the public education or others in K-12, that we feel like there's a connection. And I would say that despite the difficulties facing Latino communities for education right now, you see a huge amount of improvement over the last few years, and certainly in terms of kids getting into college, and that should be recognized as the work of a whole bunch of people who care. And so certainly this panel, this side of the panel represents well what's happening. I'm going to talk a little bit about I'm going to give a little bit of history about the role of the Center for Latino Studies at Ferris, why it exists, why I'm working with it in the capacity I am now. But I would say, and I'm going to start a little bit with my own individual story, because I happen to think it's pretty compelling and interesting, but that's just me. But I think that I came to Ferris from Chicago, and Chicago has a very strong tradition of community organizing and communities dealing with different community concerns. And I saw Ferris as an institution that has its core mission is to really assisting basically students who hadn't been to universities before, whose families hadn't been to universities before. I wanted to live in Grand Rapids. I thought I wanted to raise my children in Grand Rapids, and that cute little boy over there with the fuzzy ears is one of them. And I wanted to, because of the racial diversity of the city, and I think that Grand Rapids is a wonderful place to raise kids, and they've been fortunate to spend time in the Latino community at the Hispanic Center and in other communities in Grand Rapids. As a result, it's been a rich experience for them, and being in Grand Rapids Public Schools has been a rich experience for them. But I really felt like that the impact I could have would be much greater if the institution I worked at saw as its mission to do this kind of work. And so in one way or another, I've been encouraging the university to work in Grand Rapids Public Schools, to create relationships in Grand Rapids Public Schools. And fortunately, right now, the Ferris State University has all of its top leadership sees that as its work is to helping to get a variety of people from Grand Rapids, from urban areas, from the Latino community, ready to go to college and are working to provide that. And I'll name names here because I think names are important, because it is individuals that do it. Leadership matters, power matters. So rather than just the sociology professor who brings his students to interact with people, it helps to be on the board. It helps to be in positions where decisions are made. And so I encourage people to be engaged at that level. It helps to have presidents and vice presidents see it as their work to connect to a community rather than just the professors. And so Don Green here in Grand Rapids, Fritz Erickson, our provost, our vice presidents, David Pilgrim, and our president. So those are all people who, now that they see it as their work, they bring resources here. And I would always encourage people. This isn't just, I think it's important as individuals to prod our institutions to invest in the community. And so that's very important. And that's really how, through a decade of work, has led to where we're at now. About a year ago, Ferris set about connecting with community leaders in the Latino community. John said on a panel about a year ago, we had our vice presidents sitting in a room all day long from here at Grand Rapids Community College, listening to community leaders from the Hispanic Center, from other universities, and telling the university what the university needed to begin to do if it wanted to serve Latino students, what it needed to do on campus, what it needed to do in its relationship to the community. It was actually, to some extent, was the most accomplished thing I've done in my career, is not bringing John and Marta to Ferris, although Marta is visiting next week, but bringing the campus to the community and having people in the community tell the leaders of the university what it should do. And it's remarkable that the university went back and then did what it was asked to do by the community leaders. And it's a unique historical, I think it's quite an accomplishment that that's occurred. We started the Center for Latino Studies, and Provost decided that they needed a faculty member to help get it set up, to navigate the structures of the university, and to be, again, speaking to this issue of power, it's nice to have tenure in this position and to be able to ask questions that need to be asked without regard to any consequences. And so, to some extent, that's what gave me that work. Plus I think the vision that the university needs to be in the community. So there's three things that came out of that work that we did a year ago that we've been doing this last year. One is that really creating a community on campus for Latino students. And so if you look at the data, Hispanic students have been well under represented on college campuses, but they're growing very quickly, despite what campuses are doing. Even if campuses aren't trying to do anything to outreach to Latino communities, Latinos are showing up in universities. And universities as a whole need to accept that and be willing to make a community for those students once they're there. And I feel pretty good that we've been working towards that and doing much better at it. The other two things is really connecting the community to the university, and the third thing is connecting the university to the community. Universities do lots of things. They have lots of relationships. They prepare students for careers in many communities. And so those communities should also include Black and Latino communities. And so, so my work has been to find out what the university does and to see if it can do it in Latino communities, such as business development or teacher training. And then the counterpart to that has been to find out what's needed in the community and to find out if there's a resource at the university that could address those needs. And the purpose of that, and this is my main goal in establishing this for these first couple of years, is to create the university as a community-based organization, not as an organization that serves another community, but to really create the university as a community-based organization. And to some extent, I think that exists here with Grand Rapids Community College, but it hasn't existed as often. Universities tend to see themselves as places that offer services or market services, or perhaps see a community as consumers. And I'd like to see Ferris State University as a community-based organization, as one that's at the table when decisions are, not to tell the community what they ought to be doing, but to be on par with those community-based organizations. I think I'll stop with that.
Okay, thank you.
Martha, I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about the Hispanic Center's English as a Second Language programs and the demographic you serve in those programs and what successes you've had.
Yes, thank you, Allison. And actually, that would probably be a better question for our Director of Adult Education, who's sitting here in the front row, Ms. Janelle Ott. If you could raise your hand. We have historically served individuals that have come into our organization that either have children in the public schools, or in some cases, they do not. We are not a closed system in that regard. We have open enrollment for anyone in the community that's interested in accessing our programming. Janelle has worked very, very hard to ramp up the testing and the placement and develop an accelerated curriculum using some best practice tools from our peers around the country to not only provide quality programming, but do it in an accelerated time frame for the people coming through the door. Because the last thing we want adults in our community to do is come in and waste their time. Either be placed in the wrong environment because it's below their skill set or above their skill set, or come in for 2 or 3 weeks worth of classes and then have to drop out because it's just not meeting the need. And so part of our commitment at the center has been, one, to hire the best staff on the planet with the highest skill set to be able to do this kind of creative tinkering with best practice tools and curriculum models in the country, and then finding the most effective way to accommodate the needs of our local community coming through the door. And so I'm very proud of the fact that we have students that are ages 16, because we have dropouts at age 16 that are coming into an ESL program, unfortunately. But young people as young as 16, our average person in the program, I think, is between ages 25 and probably 40. Because the Latino community as a whole is a fairly young demographic. But our oldest, most senior students are in their 90s. So it's not uncommon during a particular cycle of programming at the center to have a handful of students in that 60 to 90 year age bracket, which is just a phenomenal thing. I think it says something extraordinary about people's interest in furthering their education, their interest in aspiring to be something better than, reaching for a higher dream than what they've had access to so far. And so one of the things that I think has been remarkable about our programming, especially under Janelle's, Ms. Ott's current direction, is that we have implemented this accelerated time frame, what was it, 2 years ago? About a year and a half? About a year and a half ago, introduced this modified curriculum and fast track. And what we've seen is that when you do the pre and post testing for our students, we are head and shoulders above. We're like 30% higher. We have 3 times higher than the national average of academic and skill gains for the students once we do the post testing. And so we went after best practice curriculum, wanting to see, who's doing the best work in the country at in their ability to navigate English as a second language. But we've taken that, we've shortened the time frame for the classes, and we've ended up with triple-digit gains in our post-test environment. And so we're very pleased with the fact that we are able to retain students, even though they're individuals that are working poor, and in many cases have children that need to be accommodated, children and complicated family schedules that need to be accommodated, and transportation issues that are always a problem. But people enroll in the classes, they pay a modest fee to participate. It's not free. We don't run a program that's free and staffed from one end to the other with volunteers. We do ask for a small fee. They come in, they test, they access the program, they stay, and then they graduate. And I think our challenge at this point is getting beyond the two levels of English as a second language that are currently provided in our organization. We have a beginners and kind of an intermediate level. We do not have an advanced level of ESL. Or a stronger kind of conversational ESL environment, and that's a serious deficiency. And I think the other challenge is figuring out how to serve more people, because if we're serving 150, 200 people that are coming through the door in an average year, we've had moments in time when we've had 50 to 100 people on a waiting list, waiting for the next rotation of classes. And our limitation of space, our limitation of financial resources makes it impossible for us to expand beyond the work that we're doing now. And so there's a great deal of interest in this work on behalf of your grassroots community in the neighborhood surrounding this institution. There is an interest in getting quickly in and out of that environment, hopefully because it'll improve your chances at upward mobility at work, or at your ability to communicate with key people in your life, like the teachers that are working with your children in a public school environment. And people have no interest in wasting time. They need to be able to access a program. They need to be able to get in and out. They need to acquire skills while they're there. And that is the commitment to the work that we do.
Thank you.
Okay, I know we've all talked about language barriers a little bit already, but I wanted to address the lack of education in the parents and the lack of language in the parents and how that affects directly the children, and not only in school but also outside of school. And I think I'm going to start with John on that, and then if anybody else wants to chime in.
So in my work as a community school coordinator at Burton and in the broader community as well, clearly the lack of being able to speak in English for the parents is an obvious barrier. Other than you know the skills to be able to communicate with your boss critical information to the job that you're doing. They often know how to do that. But when it comes to conversing, for example, with a teacher about where their child is academically, then it becomes a major barrier. And I came from, I'm Puerto Rican, came from a Spanish-speaking family that I took advantage of that lack of language skills in my mom until she figured out I was lying to her, and then my life changed. And you know, we laugh, and at an early age it's funny, but when they become middle schoolers and they begin to intercept messages that are really critical, not only to their safety or whatnot, and the parent, it becomes very telling about what needs to happen. So to that end, for example, we partner with the Literacy Center of West Michigan, and we have 4 ESL classes, 2 in the morning and 2 in the evenings. We have about 90 parents involved overall in that endeavor. And the parents love it because they're in an educational environment where it's safe and they can begin to study and use those skills. It's one thing to try and, just practice with your kid. And sometimes there's power differentials there with a parent because they have to parent as well as, and they're learning as well as their child sometimes. And so that becomes an issue where we as workers in the school have to be sensitive to those issues with our parents, and certainly with their kids as well. Oftentimes, because of the language barrier, it's also, and culture, I grew up where my parents spanked me. In our day and age, we talk about that issue, and CPS is on your door knocking. And so our parents often try and understand, so what are the laws here? What's permissible? Because if I can't control my kid, how am I supposed to parent or watch out for them or help them avoid becoming delinquent or something like that? Those are real issues that I talk daily with our parents about. And also then with the teachers as well, being able to get critical information to the teachers. Oftentimes, some teachers will say, your child is doing okay. And then when the parent figures out what the report card actually says, they're saying, this is not acceptable to me. But given your child, given the fact that they're Hispanic, that there's a language barrier, your child is doing okay. And I know our administrator, she says that's not acceptable. And our parents are telling our teachers that don't tell me that it's okay when they're about 6 months to a year to 2 years behind, let's say, in reading. And so they want the truth so that they can figure out what do I have to do, or who do I have to partner with to make that happen if I can't do it. And trust me, they want the help and they're looking for the help. And so the language barrier is not just the language issue, but it's also an economic issue for our parents. And so ESL becomes important because it helps them acquire the language that they need to not only work and survive, but then to engage in their kids, because their kid is not only bicultural, but now they're bilingual, and where oftentimes the parent may not be.
Okay, I think Martha wanted to add something.
Yes, because I know that we have students in this audience that probably appreciate numbers and data as well, and it's important for us to understand we don't know what we don't know, right? In a world that is a data-driven decision-making world, if you don't have data that tells you, that provides you better information about the parents of the schools in our public school system, then how do you address the concerns? How do you identify the unmet needs? How do you identify the gaps? And so that's one of the challenges that we ran into fairly early on when I came back to the center 5 years ago to re-engage this community-based work. And one of the things that we found in doing our own private research of the African American and the Latino communities in what many of the foundations these days call the hope zones. They're the deepest concentration of poverty and of people of color in the urban center. What we found was that Granville Avenue, the place where the Hispanic Center is located, it is a place that has the highest concentration of poverty in the city. And it has the lowest academic completion rate of parents in a two-parent household. So the average high school completion rate was somewhere between 35% and 40% for the households in my community. And so when you think about all of the research in the early childhood arena, the brain research, all of the studies that tell you that early childhood intervention is important, one of the things that you'll see over and over again in that research is this idea that poverty, the rate of poverty, and the academic completion of the parents in a household are two of the most critical indicators for the potential that a young child has for success on day one in kindergarten, showing up to a kindergarten classroom. And so my kids are starting out at a real deficit. And it's shocking. I mean, our numbers for academic completion, high school completion in the African American community are low, but they're above 40%. The completion rates in my community are below that number. But again, if it's not documented, if we don't have fabulous people of all ages, like those potentially sitting in this audience, like the people sitting next to me, that are writing up the work in academic journals, that tells us what the reality of this community is, that tells us where the starting point is for the work and the corrective action that has to happen to move the bar of academic achievement for my kids and families, then we're really at square one. So I share that data with an interest in also finding the partners that will help us produce better data to make better decisions as we move forward as a community.
Go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, just from a higher education perspective, this issue of bilingual supports, and I think that this is an important discussion because it also includes economic resources to provide these things. But and one of the biggest issues I've had to work with this year at Ferris is getting them to invest in bilingual supports for recruitment, especially, and certainly bilingual supports for students on campus. The students on campus, I mean, students get to a college campus bilingual, so they're going to be able to participate in the university with English. But the language serves two important purposes. One is symbolically, is that on a college campus, especially, finding people who speak your language. If you've been on college campuses, which you all are, finding people who speak your language is important. It means that you have a connection to home, whatever that language is. But secondly, as John was talking about, it empowers the parents. So when I talk to people who work in bilingual, so if a bilingual recruiter, or if the university spends its resources to publish bilingual recruitment materials, then the parents get to be involved in the decisions that their kids had to go to college. And that's vitally important. I mean, if we can't think about it. And so when those things, and I think it's just imperative, I've kind of surveyed informally universities in West Michigan, and none of us really do this much, if at all. And I think that it's pretty important when you've given a parent the opportunity to participate in initiating conversations about what college you're going to go to, what majors are offered, et cetera. And, I mean, I think that you keep hearing this issue of community and family and its role in education. And so a simple matter of providing bilingual materials means that the family, and the family is pretty important in the Latino community, as in all of our communities, then the family gets to play a part in decisions related to education. So I think it's very important that we all become advocates for this. And it's a pretty simple idea. So.
I do have something to comment about when you talked about parent empowerment and engaging their children in education. And it is true that language is a barrier for parents who don't speak English. However, best practices will show that you don't necessarily need to speak the English language in order to engage your child in learning. And so we've had training sessions with our parents where we work with them and have them use their own language to engage them, especially in reading, because we all know that reading is number one in order for our children to be, for any child to be successful. They need to be very good readers. And so even though a parent doesn't understand a word of English, when a child is reading, a parent can engage the student in questioning and asking those kinds of questions about that, engage the child in comprehension questions, so that they become a teacher as well. They have the time, they're listening, they can ask a child, well, what is the meaning of that? Or who's the protagonist? Of course, they wouldn't use that word. What's going on? What did you see? What kind of images do you have? All those kinds of questions. They don't have to speak English in order to engage their child in their academic learning. Which empowers the parent. But if the parent doesn't have that training, they do feel powerless. But that's one way that schools can do that. And those are national best practices that are available to anyone. And those of you who are in education, it's not just the Latinos, but anybody who's in a second language, that's really very important. The other is in the area of language, which when you go to a school where there's not bilingual education or an immersion or dual language immersion, you run the risk of, when you introduced English, of having the child take sides in their language. They begin to see the English language as the dominant language and perhaps the language of power. And there's a struggle, there's a cultural struggle that goes on with the child about beginning to feel that their Spanish language is not important, or not the language of power, or not the language of power within their own life sphere. And then we run the risk, as every school does in the country, of the child losing their language, their native language, and becoming English dominant. And what happens is what John sees, especially with those middle schoolers, where there's a disconnect with the family. The parents can't communicate with their children anymore. They don't have that closeness because they're not communicating because the child has decided that they're going to take the dominant language. So every school, including San Juan Diego Academy, runs that risk. And so that's a very fine line and a very delicate dance that every school district or every school has to maneuver, because you run that risk of, especially in this time, in this society, of a child becoming monolingual instead of becoming multilingual. So that's just something that I wanted to say about parent involvement. It doesn't matter where you're at. You don't have to be unempowered because you don't speak English. You can become very much engaged in your child's education in a different way.
Thank you. Did anybody else have anything to add?
You know, I just, in terms of what Martha was alluding to in terms of statistics, so in Grand Rapids Public Schools has over 19,000 students, the third largest district in Michigan. In GRPS, 72 different countries represented in the student body. Talk about multicultural, 44 plus languages, you know, within that student body. 86% free lunch, reduced lunch. I mean, talk about poverty and that need. And then 25% are special ed eligible. So not only do they need the standard education, but they also need accommodation for their particular struggles. 6,000 students plus, over 6,000 students are the Hispanic population within GRPS, which represents 32% of the student body. So you can imagine, and hopefully we're talking straight here, so you can imagine if the majority of the teachers are white and their student body, 32% of it are Hispanic and other languages, it means that the teachers are going to have to certainly be bicultural of something, or able to see those nuances in culture, or be bilingual to the extent that it helps engage not only the student but the parent as well. 5.74 eligible for free and reduced lunch, 95%. Over 1,000 students are eligible for special ed, 18% of that 32% number. And over 104 migrant students where, again, there's accommodations there. And it's cool to have a parochial school. I wish there were a few other parochial schools here, because, for example, Grand Rapids Christian. It would be interesting to dialogue with them, for me, about some of those things. I mean, if we were to look at their own student body and the makeup of those students that they serve. I served at Calvin College for 5 years as their assistant director for multicultural and mission and community relations. And I'm so excited to see that Ferris State has crossed that line and says we're committed to engaging in the community, to being present in the community. when I would recruit Latino or students of color, one of the things that parents said, because I was bilingual, but they would call me, how's my son or daughter? You know, I mean, in most cultures, hey, you're 18, you're out, man. Our parents would call, mira, Mr. Matias, how's my daughter doing? Or if the daughter or son called, you know, they would be calling me to maybe intersect somewhere. And those are some of the things that we had to teach the professors of Calvin. You know, hey, this is a community of sorts, and so we have to engage in many different ways. But those are some of the statistics, if you will, of the dynamics that we're facing as a public school, and certainly as a community school engaging the broader community in its education.
Go ahead.
I would also add, Allison, that bilingualism in a global economy is a plus, not a minus, right? It's taken us a lot of work since the civil rights movement in this country to think of kids from bilingual households and with bilingual potential as being asset-based individuals versus deficit-based when they show up on the first day of school. But there does have to be a concentrated effort, I think, to invest in language immersion programming, especially in urban core inner city schools with high concentrations of poverty, because we see very vibrant dual language immersion models springing up in more affluent suburban corridors of our community, but the place where you have the highest concentration of bilingual children coming into a kindergarten feeder system, those resources don't exist. Or there's been a disinvestment. And so I've been very proud to hear our new superintendent, Dr. Teresa Neal, and our leadership at the Public School Board say that there's an interest in reinvesting in dual language immersion programming in Grand Rapids Public, because I think it's been long overdue. But I wanted to make sure that everyone in this room understands, if we looked at the Spanish-speaking Latino community, the Spanish-speaking community in the U.S. As its own country, we would be the second largest Spanish-speaking country in the world. That's one heck of a consumer market, right? And the people that have understood the power of bilingualism and the power of that message have been the folks in the media industry and the folks that work and play in the consumer market, right? And so you think of enterprises like Telemundo and Mundos. Telemundo last year had the highest Nielsen ratings ever in the history of television for a soap opera that aired in the evenings. It broke all sorts of records in the US and internationally for viewership. It was quite a phenomenon. But one of the things that they're doing in that television channel is that they air programming that is tailored for my demographic. A population of people in this country that don't want subtitles because we don't live our lives in subtitles. They're a nuisance. And so you put programming and advertising side by side that's in English, that's in Spanish, that's in a mixture of both, and there's no subtitles in this world because it's a waste of time. I just want to move seamlessly in the world in two languages. And that is a new reality that brilliant creative people in the consumer world have been able to absorb and start to work with. And we've been a little bit slower on the education side, both in higher education and in the trenches, in the community and in the public schools, at dealing with that new reality. But again, anything that you bring to the conversation that helps us move this work along is a real asset.
I just want to say real quick, we should be at least, higher education should be at least as sophisticated as our ATM machines, you know. So anyway.
Smartphone.
Okay, we're going to move on now to the topic of parental involvement. And I know that we've touched on a lot of aspects of it already in the conversation that we've had, but I do feel that it is the most important factor in educational attainment, not just in the Hispanic community, but also in the community as a whole. So there are a lot of barriers in the Latino community for parents to get involved with their children's education. And we've talked about the parents' lack of education. We talked a little bit about their limited cultural and legal knowledge. But I was wondering if we could elaborate maybe on their limited access to resources, such as time because maybe they have to work 2 jobs, or technology, or the understanding of technology, or transportation, and just basic things like that. So does anybody want to take that?
Well, I find at San Juan Diego Academy that in order for new immigrant families to survive, we have 2 parents working, usually full-time. And that is probably the #1 barrier, because there certainly is not a lack of wanting to do that. People do desire to be engaged. Parents want to be engaged in their child's education. In the private schools, obviously, parents have already demonstrated that they wanted to be engaged by being willing to put down tuition in order to, and that's their affirmation that I want to be engaged. But we just did a survey of our parents and our children, and a little study of the children who are most successful in our school, and that is probably the #1. You're absolutely right. Even in a private school, contributor for a student's success, because in the public schools, as well as any other school, you're going to find attendance is a real issue. And when students begin to have 10 days of absences, they're already behind. And an engaged family, a parent who's engaged, will make sure if they're not there, that they're going to find a way for the child to get to school in the morning, even though the child's starting at 8 and they have to leave at 6 in the morning. And sometimes that can be rough, because it means they have to manipulate everyone they know, their family, neighbors. And if you're new to the neighborhood, you may not have created those associations to help you with all those difficulties when you're working, when a family's got split shifts and so forth. But I would say that is probably the #1 barrier to family engagement, is the parents' involvement in jobs and time away from their family.
And I would say as well that our experience has been clearly language is a key barrier. You'd be amazed at how many places will ask a parent to bring a sibling of the child for the parent-teacher conference. Just bring a family member, bring another young person in the family to come and do the interpretation for the parent-teacher conferences. Not okay. That's how we end up with John Matias. And he's the exception to the rule, right, about how this turns out. But it is, the language barriers are very deeply problematic. And then when you're doing activities in a community forum, like we do at the Hispanic Center, the question of, do you run a meeting do you ever run bilingual meetings where you're potentially having a conversation that's meant to last an hour in either English or Spanish, but will now be a 2-hour meeting because you're trying to do the simultaneous side-by-side interpretation. So we've developed the policy that we do sessions for parents that are sessions in Spanish or sessions in English, but not both. Because again, we don't want to waste people's time. Their time is precious, especially in 2 working households. Transportation issues are a serious issue to engagement. And so for students at Union High School, for example, the kids get bus passes to come in from all over the city because there's no public transportation, right? You guys broke the union, the drivers' union a while back, a couple of superintendents ago, a little bit before your time. Yeah. So there's no longer any busing for our kids. The kids get a bus card to be able to get to school from whatever part of the city they're coming from. But access for the parents is not quite as simple. So organizations like the Hispanic Center have an almost non-existent budget for bus passes for parents to try to get them from one side of town to Union High School, to show up for events, to show up for parent-teacher conferences. It's a significant issue. We also have found that daycare is a serious obstacle in having a conversation with families. We never assume that a parent that has a teenager at Union High School has only that one person to worry about in the household. We run meetings at the center where we always have a paid daycare provider. We always provide dinner as a standard rule of thumb. We provide a meal for the parents and for the kids that are coming into attendance. And we always provide daycare in a separate room, so that parents are able to engage and meaningfully, kind of take a deep breath and focus on information that's being shared. The timing of the meetings is also important. It's real easy to run a shop where everybody has an 8 to 5 job. Community organizations don't have 8 to 5 lives, 8 to 5 p.m. lives. We have to have meetings in the evenings and on the weekends. And so we explain that to people when we hire them into the organization. If you're doing work in our education programming, you're going to be spending evenings and weekends engaging families. But the timing of meetings is important. If you're doing the coffee chats with a principal at 10 o'clock in the morning, the odds that you're going to get more than 2 or 3 parents coming through the door are pretty slim, right? You have to make meetings and opportunities available for parents that accommodate households where everybody's working and potentially working more than one job. And then lack of digital access. The technology barrier is a serious barrier for a number of our households. Our average family moves at least 2 times, maybe 3 times in the city, from one part of the city to another, just because of rental issues and low-income housing issues. We might have a cell phone on record as the family phone, but usually end up finding that number has been disconnected and a new number is the new number that needs to go into a file at least 2 or 3 times a year. And then the potential that the family has Wi-Fi access and has a computer at home are pretty slim. And so in an increasingly digital world where systems and educators expect you to be able to fill out the parent survey online, enroll your kids for school next year online, track your students' progress online, send your teacher an email if you have a concern online, how these things happen in households where you have adults that have never turned on the on switch for a computer, where there is no internet access, and where there's this poverty and constant mobility across the city, is a stretch of the imagination. And so organizations and institutions that are interested in engaging people have an opportunity to do so, but you need to take these barriers into consideration, and then talk to people that are in the business of eliminating those barriers, so that you're able to get a full house of 50 to 100 people attending the sessions that you organize. Because I think all of us across the space know how to do that, and see other individuals and organizations struggle, and there's no magic to this. You just have to understand some of those basic barriers and the basic strategies to get beyond them.
Thank you. Did anybody else have anything to add to that?
Yeah, it is a given that that we're going to do things bilingually. I mean, at Burton, we decided similarly that we're going to do something either in Spanish or in English, because it's not fair to either party.
At the time.
And sometimes parents will get mad at that, and we say the reason why we do that is because, we respect your time in regards to a meeting or something that's taking place. Our administrator demands that during our conferences that the bilingual staff be available to interpret, rather than allowing the kids to interpret for the parents. Sometimes it's convenient in that sense, but I know personally my experience, for example, going with my mom to her doctor and then having to explain things that I should not know about, it was traumatizing, to say the least. So you can imagine when a parent has to reveal that kind of personal information to their child. It changes some dynamics there.
It does.
The other thing I want to encourage you all to struggle with being bilingual in some language. It will benefit you. When I lived in El Paso, I got to know a Chinese person who came to work in one of the maquila, the twin plants in Juarez, Mexico, from China, who was, well, he was more than trilingual. But him and I could converse in Spanish, and it was just, one of these things where like, wow, this is weird. This dude is Chinese, but he's talking to me in Spanish, and then he can switch into English. And, but he was able to serve in that capacity. Why? Because he struggled to learn another language other than the one he already knew. And not only that, but English as well. And so struggle with that. Wrestle with that. Our parents appreciate when, and again, we're talking straight, when a white person is making an effort to talk to them in their native language. And they will help them out, and vice versa. When a Spanish-speaking person, a parent is struggling in their English, and they're being helped by this English-speaking person, there is that sense like, yeah, we're struggling with this together, and that's okay. You don't have to be embarrassed and all of that. We'll get through this. And there is that connection that's made there. When we talk about parent involvement, for example, at Burton, we have a strategy for parent involvement by classroom. So every single class has a list of activities that they want the parent to do, and then our parent action leaders that we call PALs are engaged to make sure that parents of that particular classroom, because most of us, yeah, we want to help the school out, but if I can help my kids' classroom, I'll do it, because that's an investment that I'm making in my kids, but it's also 32 other kids that I'm helping as well. So we saw the value of that. We saw parents willing to come out to those activities or to laminate or to do other kinds of things. It's interesting because our teachers now are saying, we don't just want them to do laminating and Xeroxing. We want them to be engaged in the classroom. Interesting. Some of that is classroom management, but some of that too is that they need the help. In a classroom of 30 students, it's very difficult with the many needs that students have to really be able to engage. And parents can be a great asset in that. GRPS this year instituted something new called PTCCs, Parent Teacher Community Council, and that's where the administration would charge with getting a panel of parents and teachers and administrators together to talk about school climate, school culture, and what it was going to do to better that. And today we had ours just prior to coming here. And it was very fascinating to hear parents talk about wanting to be more engaged, wanting to be more informed. And now that the Common Core is coming out in 2014, which is a whole philosophical change of educating our kids, not only do our teachers need to be educated on that new curriculum, but can you imagine trying to do that with parents? Can you imagine trying to do that with parents of other languages? It's going to be quite a task. So we've begun to figure out how do we do that at Burton, so that we can begin to transition parents into this new thing that they're going to have to learn how to help their kids with. And then we have a lot of things. For example, we have a PTO, Parent Teacher Organization, which we have a meeting tonight. And many of our parents come out to that because it's informational, it's community, and we believe in celebrating. But it also engages parents in finding out what's going on in the school. Here's a report of the MEP test, of things that are happening. Here are things that your kids need to know, or that we need to know from you in order to engage with your child in school. So obviously parent involvement is very critical in that, and truly parents they want to be involved.
One dynamic about the Latinos who are in this country and they're represented here in our area is that many of them are young. And the parents that we see coming to our schools, public or private, are young people. They're just like you. And they have the same interests and the same energy and the desire to learn and engage in their community. They want to be involved not only in their child's education, but they want to be involved in the community. It's the same dynamic that we see in youth. And this is a time and an opportunity for organizations and schools to harness that. There are young parents, the reason that they have smartphones, that's how they don't have a home phone, they're having smartphones. They engage their communities in their countries with their smartphones. They engage their friends and families with their smartphones. So these are young families who are out there just like all of you, being who want to be involved and who represent the same desires that we see from our Anglo young parents, and that is they are seeking the best for their children. We're not looking at the typical Latino family of 30 or 40 years ago, where you had families who were content to be in a job, like even American families, that a steady job, and their education was limited. But we're looking at, and they had large families. Our families are now much smaller, and they desire the absolute best, and they are willing to do whatever they can, spending money if they have it, spending time and energy to get the best education for their child. That's why we have parents, Latino parents, who are looking at private schools having to pay tuition because they're looking for the best. So when we think about Latino families, they look just like our Anglo families in that way, the same desires.
And if I could just share a resource very quickly. I was at a great meeting about a week ago. I serve on a Title III advisory committee with the Michigan Department of Education, and we meet about quarterly, about a couple of times a year. And we were talking about this complexity of explaining Common Core standards, to our ELL households. They shared a wonderful resource. I've only started to explore it and share it internally with our staff as well. But there's a website called colorincolorado.org that has a lot of resources for educators and for community-based organizations that want access to resources, access to research and best practices, to be able to engage this conversation about Common Core standards and to have a meaningful conversation with parents about that. So again, colorincolorado.org. For the little that I've seen of it so far is really wonderful, and I highly recommend it.
Okay. I do want to reserve the last probably 15 minutes for questions, but did you have anything that you wanted to add, Tony, to the parental involvement issue?
No, I think that's a good answer.
Pretty much got it all covered there. Okay, good. Well, we still have a few minutes before we're going to take questions. So I guess I would like to touch just very, very briefly on embracing cultural heritage and the effects that it has in the Latino community, especially with regards to a lot of the negative stereotypes that they are faced with every day. So, anyone? John?
Say that again?
Sorry.
I lost my train of thought.
Well, I think I could start.
Yeah.
Just
Okay, all right.
negative stereotypes, thinking in the classroom, in the school setting. There are some institutionalized stereotypes and negative stereotypes that I think everybody sort of recognizes. But I think the most important is the relationship the child has with the teacher or the staff in that school. And what if you are not of the culture, or if you have not done a study or have an understanding of the cultures of the children that you're working with, you're going to bring your own stereotypes, you're going to bring your own ideas and your own culture into that setting. And if you're the teacher and that already means that the power rests in you. And that makes that a different, makes it difficult for the child, because the child is in a different relationship. It's the authority and the child relationship. So anything that you bring, comments, thoughts, even ideas of what is right and what is wrong, colors, or, this should or shouldn't, often teachers are not aware of the things that they say or do and how they affect the child. Things with food, things with going to bed, things with relationships with sisters and brothers. It's not the Anglo stereotype. It's very, very different in Latino cultures. And each culture, each regional group, each nationality brings something different. And if a teacher or a school hasn't made a study of those cultures and what that means for the child, quite often there's all kinds of things that happen that are very subtle to the child, that are can be very traumatizing. So it's really very important in the school setting that when a teacher comes to that school and sees that diversity in that classroom, that teacher has made the effort to understand something about the culture, so that those faux pas won't be made.
I think that all of us, all of you, if we think about what we're going to know about the next 50 years of your career, is that you're going to have to cross cultural boundaries. And I think that absolutely is probably why a lot of you are asked to sit here today. It's certainly true. So I think that in terms of what is it our expectation as if we're as educators who are in the classroom, as Rosa was talking about, in terms of our responsibility, I think that I see as my job is helping all kinds of students to learn to engage and learn from other cultures. And so non-Latino students at Ferris who are getting a chance to encounter Latino communities is learning to cross cultural boundaries. And I think that also we have a very informal studies component of our Latino studies is really just getting our students access to other Latino communities. So if we're not learning about culture in the home, and we're not learning about culture in traditional public education, then there isn't really, then students, or even students from Latino backgrounds, might get to college without a lot of background in the cultural traditions of their own culture or the cultural traditions of other Latino communities. So I have, again, I think that my always, just like I brought the university to the community when we were doing work, brought leaders to the community, so students. So I like to invite people to campus to speak, but I actually much prefer to take people from campus to community. So it's been really fun the last few years to bring a busload of students from Ferris to the Chavez March. But I also took just a couple weeks ago for an alternative spring break with our Hispanic student organization and our Spanish language club to Chicago, where we visited John's old neighborhood in Chicago. So the Puerto Rican neighborhoods and Mexican neighborhoods in Chicago, so people could see what a community of 600,000 Mexicans look like. So it's pretty fascinating. So there's this street in Chicago, 26th Street, La Villita, that is the second largest business district in the city of Chicago, second to Michigan Avenue. State Street is third. So if you kind of think about this, the significance, when Martha was talking earlier about, the commerce culture, I mean, we're going to have to engage, and that's kind of my comment about this ATM machine, is that we got to be able to cross these cultural boundaries, and we're going to be doing business in Spanish-speaking communities. And I think also the other thing that's really fantastic about these opportunities now is that we get a chance to learn how to cross and learn from many cultural groups because of the significance of the Latino community here now. So I think it's just multiple possibilities that come from that. So.
And I would say that, for those that don't know me, I'm a cultural anthropologist by training. And so I think it's a fabulous discipline. No digs at sociology, but in anthro, you're really taught to be a professional stranger, and it's a very cool thing. It's a very cool skill to learn, to be able to navigate multiple worlds and communities. So some of what we've done at the Hispanic Center in the last couple of years is really focused on having these interesting conversations about how you can use culture to promote social change. It's not just about celebrating culture through its music and art and vibrant religious practice and food. It really is about understanding how to be a meaningful cultural broker in your community, in a community that has a lot of challenges and needs to move things upward and onward, right? And so the best example I can give you for how we go about the business of brainstorming and doing some of that work is we could set out a flyer. I use this example a lot just because it's easy. We could set out a flyer into the world that says, we want to talk about Mexican machismo. Show up 7 p.m., on the dot Tuesday night for dinner at the Hispanic Center. We could put that flyer out into the world and get 3 very angry feminists that show up for dinner and coffee, right? Or we could organize a Day of the Dead celebration. And I could have 200 families show up. We can feed them dinner. We can have music going. We could have a ceremonial altar at the head of the room. We can shuttle the kids off to their art classes downstairs while the parents sit down for a lecture to enjoy their food. And then we sock it to them with a conversation about violence in Latino households, because the altar is dedicated to women and children that have died in Latino households due to violence, family violence. And so there are elements of a culture that should not be celebrated. And we have those deep, dark little secrets, too, that are hard to talk about in public. But when you have people that are embedded in the culture and in the community, you're able to push the boundaries of that work and say, culture is great, let's celebrate the assets, let's leave the garbage, let's throw the garbage out, leave the bad things behind. Because we need to move some collective work forward. And so if you are an organization that does not have cultural brokers embedded in the hallways of your school or in your workplace, then the question of where are the organizations? Where's the Jaun Matias? Where's the Rosa Fraga? Where's the Hispanic Center of Western Michigan in your immediate world that you can partner with to be meaningful, to have this ability to do this cultural brokering becomes a real challenge. And the last thing I'll say on this issue, because I do want us to get to Q&A, is that I grew up in the 1980s in a world where, in places in this country, where teachers still used corporal punishment. They used a paddle to punish kids when they were bad. And I grew up in an elementary school environment in South Florida when we were there with my family, where we would be beaten and disciplined for speaking Spanish. And so in order for me to talk to people for the first 3 years of my life as an elementary school student, we would hide under the portable buildings at lunchtime and speak Spanish quietly to each other because we didn't have another language to communicate in. And so English was not just the language of power. It was a language of pain and discipline. And that was not an environment where my bilingualism was celebrated. It was far from it. And we've moved farther down this road, thankfully, and live in a different world now. But I didn't read a book by Sandra Cisneros until I got to college. I didn't have exposure in any of the public schools that I attended in Florida, Texas, or Michigan. Didn't have exposure to history classes, didn't have exposure to literature written in my parents' native language or by Chicano and Boricua scholars. Didn't have access to any of that until I got to college. You can make a difference by bringing that wealth of information into the lives of young people and families at a much earlier rate, right? because we shouldn't be depending on the fact that one of us or two of us will get to college to get exposure to Martí or to Sandra Cisneros, and to the richness of those contributions in our community. It should be more easily accessible to a wider range of children and families in our community. And so I applaud any and all of your efforts to engage this work and to help us have this conversation today. So, Allison, back to you.
Okay, we're going to open up for Q&A, and DeVivo back there is going to be taking questions.
We have a number of questions here. Thank you so very much, by the way. Yes, and we have a question right here.
How do you mentioned how when you do meetings in schools and events, you try to you try to provide convenience to parents by doing maybe an English meeting and then having another one in Spanish. I think I'm sure you noticed too that's probably a fine line. John mentioned how some parents get angry and they don't understand why. So how do you bring parents together still? While you're trying to provide that convenience, how do you also make sure that the whole school or the whole community is still one community and people don't feel like, okay, so there is the Spanish meeting, there is the English, whatever. Do you have programs that you do together for everybody just to bring everyone together?
I think, at least for Burton, we are intentional about bringing the many people groups. Although the majority are Hispanic, we do have Caucasian and African American students and families in our student body. And so given who we are and what we know, we want to be inclusive, even though the majority are Hispanic and perhaps the parents might insist on it being in Spanish. We also have to say, no, but we have to be inclusive of the many students that we have that are different from the Hispanic culture that is dominant at Burton. And parents can understand that given, their own experience, of being excluded. And so, no, I wouldn't want that either. And then we engage parents too in that conversation about the stereotypes that even they have of each other. Emphasizing that, hey, this is a safe environment because we are a community school, and sometimes that gives us a permission to as opposed to being a school, but a community school, the connotation is that we're going to be inclusive of. And that seems to open the door to a lot of different kinds of conversations that maybe would have been real difficult in other situations.
And so the recommendation I would have for the activities, I think it's a responsibility of leadership. In a school building, the teachers in that school, the administrators in that school, that have a responsibility to say, okay, we're doing reasonable accommodations, where we're trying to engage people in these different multilingual formats, but we do have to have a couple of activities a year where we're asking people to develop a cohesive bond as parents and as families supporting one school, right? Or one organization, in our case. And the best recommendation I have for you is that when you do those events, if you have a presenter, if you have a program, you need to be using the UN-style headsets. And have somebody in the back of the room that's whispering into people's ears in a different language, whatever that language might be, so that you're able to do simultaneous interpretation versus side-by-side interpretation, which is the more cost-effective model. So it's going to be a little bit more expensive, and you're going to need the equipment. But the Grand Rapids Public Schools, as one example, is a partner that's really great. They already have that equipment in-house and just need to schedule the use of it. So again, it's about being respectful of people's time. It's about developing a program that's meant for all and can be enjoyed for all, regardless of the language of the people sitting in the room, and making the process as expedient as possible.
Thank you.
We
One
use
more
the
question.
same thing as well, and even though we're a small group, we have to have those because it's for expediency.
I grew up in the Godfrey Lee community and then moved out to Caledonia where I graduated. So I've seen, both ends of the spectrum, so to speak. Now, obviously, Grand Rapids Public Schools, Godfrey Lee Public Schools have both made huge strides in helping the Hispanic community graduate and that sort of thing. But would you put the blame, I guess, more on the schools for more not being done up to this point? I know you made the point personally about, like the Catholic schools, so to speak, having higher rates. Not like to blame, point fingers, but in that
exactly.
aspect.
We're all in this together because we share children. So there really is no blaming or pointing fingers. There are issues and there are strategies and there's a lot of learning to be done. In our parish and especially in our Catholic communities here in Grand Rapids, what we are seeing is happening in our parishes has happened to the community at large. The community is changing and it's a learning time. And putting the blame doesn't help anyone. What we need to do is help each other learn. Not only find out with statistics about what's going on, learning about cultures, but also finding out practices and engaging and using practices and sharing those practices. Like Martha mentioned, ways that we can have access when you want to bring people together. That's a matter of sharing. A low graduation rate has been around for public schools forever. Immigrants have faced that throughout our country's history. New immigrants come in, they face language as an issue, and so we're seeing same things happening now as has happened in the past. There are always new practices that we need to learn about, but it's also a matter of opening one's mind and opening oneself to learning new things and to trying new things and also looking at best practices and putting those into place.
Yeah. Real quick, I think one of the things I think is in terms of this blame issue is important. But here's what I would say. I would say at one level is that the education of our community's children should be the responsibility of the institutions in the community. And to some extent, we've shifted education to being a consumer item, and we don't necessarily see the education of other people's children as our responsibility. And I think that so all the institutions in the community need to recognize the work that needs to be done. And I would say, and that's what I think I opened with earlier, in that the Kent Schools Services Network is an example of it, is that this community has recognized that it needs to accept more responsibility. With that said, though, I think it's also important that public schools, and I think that public school systems, higher ed also, but public school systems need to listen more. And so I think, again, that's where I encourage participants, people to be access to power and to have access to the decision makers and to be at the table. And so, and I think that it's, the Hispanic Center has played a very big role in making sure that voices are heard. And I'm sitting here listening to what is the impact of where Union High School is located and whether or not there's a bus pass to get a parent to a parent-teacher conference, which is something that we kind of think, it's kind of important for me to get a chance to listen to that. And so that's something that we could do to improve the relationship of children's education, right? But it's really important that we participate in a way that we hear from all the different segments of the community. But I still put the responsibility of education of the community's children on the community and the institutions in the community. So.
Thank you so much.
I just had one final thought about this conversation about blame, because I think it's a key issue. When we blame people for mistakes and for historical legacies, like the dropout rate, some of them that are inherited by new leadership that just showed up at the doorstep, people get defensive. And conversations don't happen. They just kind of break down. And everybody goes to their corner to sulk about how bad this encounter just was. I like to talk to people about in the language of accountability and transparency. And what that means is, one of the things that we do as an organization is we follow the money. And when you follow the money, and you're having conversations with administrators about per pupil allocations, it's really important to know that Title III dollars, there are a number of dollars that come along with English language learners, migrant farm worker kids, homeless kids that are McKinney-Vento eligible. There are a whole series of federal dollars that flow from the feds to the state to a local community that are meant to supplement programs and enhance programs and services for parents and families and the kids. They're not meant to supplant the dollars that you misappropriated to hire that legal counsel for the district, right? But when you don't have elected representation on school boards, and the Latino community has very little, if any, Latino representation across the state in any of our local school boards, and you are a local control state where decisions, the policy decisions and the investment decisions around education dollars are made at that school board level and superintendent level, I don't think I can count on one hand the number of Latino or people of color that are playing a role as superintendents in any public school in Michigan. So when you have that kind of power dynamic in reality, and then you have on top of that layers of anxiety around issues like the abysmal graduation rate, and then the poverty and everything else. I think it's a little counterproductive to talk in the language of blame. Would highly encourage all of us to be talking in the language of accountability and transparency, because it's up to in the face of that limited elected representation. And people at cabinet level and at superintendent positions in local schools, then it's up to our friends and allies, and it's up to our organizations and local professionals and people in the community and our parents to stand up and say, I want to talk about some accountability for the investment dollars.
It's interesting because we tend to have a knack for perpetuating conflict instead of realizing that, we're on the same team to contribute to society. We have another question, and then we may have time for one more.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier about how, the struggles of having a primarily white-based teaching staff, having to deal with issues that revolve around minorities and things that aren't native to, middle-class white world. I guess looking at the makeup of teachers across the state, across the country, being mostly Anglo middle class, is it a cause of lack of recruiting to get minorities into schools to get educated to become teachers? Is it institutionalized where the power isn't hiring minorities at a greater rate? I guess what's the problem that's creating a lack of diversity, which might be able to kind of help out a lot of those problems that there's a disconnect between cultures?
That's a great question. I do think, especially as I work in higher ed, I do think that it is the responsibility of higher ed institutions to know who they're recruiting and to know what's happening in the real world. But again, we typically are not taught to hold those institutions accountable. Now, I learned that I should have the confidence to knock on the president's door. Oh my gosh, but I'm not. But I've learned to do that, because if I don't, I can't bring a whole bunch of people with me and prod the door open in order for them to get through or to have that access. Advocacy, community organizing, I think those are critical. So I do hold institutions, for example, CC, to know I need to recruit because I know what the stats are. I know that there's a lack of representation among African American or Latinos or whatever. And then I need to hold my staff accountable to that, my recruiting staff, professors, and so forth, but also dialogue with the community of which I want represented in my school. So if you want me to go to your school, then you need to do something for me that demonstrates your commitment to me. And that's why I like what Ferris State is attempting to do. They're saying, no, we're not only going to have it out there, but we're also going to be here, and we're going to come here, and we're going to sort of sit at your footstool and learn and bring and dialogue and then bring it back and bring it forth. So that's really critical, and that's to me an umbrella of things. It's sort of all at the same time. It's near but far. You're able to focus like that and know that. The other thing is the competency pieces that really need to happen in these institutions.
Cultural competency.
You know, if we're either the largest or the second largest minority group in the United States, that's an economic base, and trust me, they know that, and they're starting to target that, and so that's our chance in terms of Latinos to then begin to say, okay, if you want me there, then you need to provide. And certainly if there's a lack of education and then poverty is an issue, then the grant scholarships need to follow, with the understanding that as you said, we give back. You don't think I've given back to my community not just being here, but economically? You don't think I give to non-for-profits? Yeah, I do. That's a value that I hold, and I think a lot of us, if I will, Latinas hold that value too, that so to speak have made it, have become professionals. I haven't forgotten where I've come from.
Thank you. Thank you. We have one last question.
My question is, I took Spanish in high school for 4 years and have retained absolutely none of it. So when it comes to your English as a second language program, what type of practices do you implement to ensure that they're going to retain that information and be able to use it on a daily basis?
It's called real life immersion. So if you're surrounded by it, if it's live or die, then you'll utilize it. If your children are growing up in the world where they've learned a message that English is the language of power and dominance, and that's all your children will speak to you, it's the only language your children will speak to you in at the dinner table, then you're in a total immersion environment. And so I think that that's the difference. But I do want to speak to the issue of the labor force in education, because it's a critical issue that we were just discussing at the state level, at the policy level a week ago. And it's really critical to understand that we're seeing the decimation of a Latino workforce in education that was coming in at a certain level of the profession and pursuing bilingual certification and working as teachers' aides in a classroom, and that reality has now shifted because of shifts to certification and credentialing at the state level. And so you have places like Wayne State University. There are a couple of powerhouse universities in the state that churn out a remarkable number of highly qualified teachers that go out into the world, to teach in the K through 12 world. And places like Wayne State University that have had one of the larger programs recruiting bilingual, bicultural individuals into this world of education have seen class enrollment go from 50 people per semester to 5 per semester because of the shifting of the courses and the criteria for certification and credentialing at the state level. And so there's now a requirement, for example, that you take a certain number of courses or do certain types of work to meet the world language requirements that are going to be a must. But there isn't a single requirement in the books in Michigan that forces any of you to take a class at an institution of higher education that will train you on working in a multicultural, multi-language environment when you hit the real world. And when you consider that there are 780,000 non-English speaking households in the state of Michigan, and that someday you might want a job and need a job in a school that has kids that are more than one ethnicity and one language, it's a disservice to you as educators coming out into the world to not have had a single class that helps you understand how to navigate that world successfully. It's a setup for failure for you and for us, right? And so something has to shift. And the question in the policy room a week ago was, what do we tinker with behind the scenes, and how do we tinker with it to shift the requirements so that higher education is responsive? And so we don't have to go door to door, president to president, to every institution of higher ed in the state, but do something that forces the hand of a shift in a different direction. because we want highly skilled people of all shapes and sizes and every background on the planet. We want the individual that had 4 years of high school Spanish and gets excited about taking a few more Spanish classes in college. We need each and every one of you. But when you come out into the real world, we also need you not to quit the first year you're on the job in Muskegon Heights or at Burton Middle or Cesar Chavez Elementary. Because nothing you did in higher ed prepared you for that real world classroom experience, right? And so, again, multiple levels of engagement and systems push have been talked about today, but I would hope that you continue to pay attention to some of those issues and continue to ask those really key questions.
Ferris is creating, in partnership with Grand Rapids Public Schools, a teacher training program here in Grand Rapids, which hopefully will address some of those issues. I do think it's an institutional level and institutional level thing, preparing teachers that are able to cross cultural and language boundaries is very important. But at the same time, I don't think that we should. A lot of the reasons that teachers leave is that this isn't a great environment for teachers today. They get bashed for showing up to school, and if you get bashed for showing up to school because you're white, that's not good, right? Mm-hmm. Because you still showed up to teach and to do a good work. And I think that those persons need to be prepared to work in a multicultural world, and higher education institutions should do it. But they're not the reasons why the workforce is limited. And I think we need to have an institutional response to that.
Absolutely. Diversity amid globalization is a fait accompli. Whether we like it or not, it's here to stay. And on that note, I would like to thank this panel that we're really honored to have you here. A round of applause, please. And I'm sure if you have any further questions, you can come up and speak with the panel members in just a few moments. Thank you so much for attending.